Most people have never been told this book exists. The Ethiopian church kept a scripture the West spent 17 centuries pretending was never there. And inside it, the afterlife is not a feeling. It has an address, a floor plan, and a staff. The dead are collected, the dead are sorted, and a certain class of them is refused at the door and pushed back down below, forbidden from rising with the rest. The book names them. It names the sorters, the wardens, and the one set over who rises. That is exactly why it was cut. Start with the book itself, because most people have never been told it exists. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church holds the widest scriptural canon of any church in the world. Where a Protestant Bible carries 66 books, the Ethiopian canon is counted in its broader form at 81, and it carries texts that were stripped out of every other tradition. The Book of Jubilees, the books of Maccabean, and above all, the Book of Enoch. Enoch is the key that unlocks the rest. For most of Christian history, the West believed the book was gone completely, surviving only as scattered quotations trapped inside older writings. Then in the year 1773, a Scottish traveler named James Bruce came back from the Ethiopian highlands carrying 3 complete manuscripts of it, written in Ge'ez, the ancient sacred language of that church. The book had never disappeared. It had simply stayed where Rome could not reach it. And that the West could not reach it is not an accident of distance alone. The Ethiopian church was among the first Christian bodies on the planet, older than most of Europe's cathedrals, and it grew in the highlands, cut off by desert and mountain from both Rome and Constantinople. It kept its own head, its own language, and its own library. So texts that were burned, buried, or quietly dropped everywhere else simply stayed on the shelf there, copied by hand, generation after generation, in a script the outside world could not even read until the modern era. When you want to know what the earliest Christians actually kept, you do not look where the winners of the councils stored their books. You look where the councils never had any power at all. And here is the part that unsettled the scholars who studied it. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were pulled out of the caves at Qumran in the 1940s, Enoch was there too, in the original Aramaic, in roughly 11 separate copies. That is more copies than were found of several books that made the final cut into the Bible. Whoever hid those scrolls did not treat Enoch as fringe or as fantasy. They treated it as scripture. They copied it more often than they copied Exodus, which forces the question the Western canon has never answered cleanly. If Enoch was scripture to the people who lived closest in time to it, who decided later that it was too dangerous to keep, and what exactly were they trying to keep out of ordinary hands? There is one more fact that makes the exclusion stranger still and almost impossible to explain away. The Book of Enoch is quoted directly, by name, inside the New Testament that the church did decide to keep. In the short letter of Jude, near the very end of the Bible, the writer names Enoch as a genuine prophet and repeats his words that the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all. The men who assembled the canon kept the letter that quotes Enoch as scripture, and then they threw out the Book of Enoch that the letter was quoting. They preserved the echo and deleted the voice. They left the fingerprint on the wall and removed the hand that made it. The removal itself was not quiet, and it was not an accident of history. As the Western Church fixed its official list of books across the 4th century, Enoch was deliberately left outside the wall. Jerome, the man who assembled the Latin Bible that Europe would read for 1,000 years, filed Enoch away as apocryphal, unreliable, not to be trusted. Augustine, writing in the City of God, went further. He admitted openly that Enoch had genuinely written these things, that the words were real, but argued that they were too ancient and too specific to be safely believed, and so they should be set aside. Read that objection carefully, because it is not the objection you would expect. The complaint was not that the book was empty or false. The complaint was that it said too much, that it named too much, that it located and measured and mapped things Scripture was supposed to leave comfortably vague. And the thing Enoch mapped in more detail than anything the West chose to keep was the country of the dead. Whatever reason they had for cutting it, it was strong enough to override the fact that their own accepted Scripture treated it as the word of a prophet. So the question is no longer whether the book is old. The question is what it says, and why that saying had to be buried. In the 22nd chapter of the Book of Enoch, the man is taken on a guided tour of that country. An angel leads him westward to a massive mountain of hard rock, and inside that mountain, Enoch finds hollow places, deep, smooth, hollowed out. He is not describing a grave, he is not describing a symbol, he is describing a facility, and like anyone shown a strange structure, he asks what it is for. The answer he is given is direct. These hollows are the places where the spirits of the souls of the dead gather. Every human being who dies, the righteous and the guilty alike, is brought here and kept until the great day of judgment. They are not drifting through heaven, they are not scattered on the wind. They are collected, and they are contained, in a specific place with a specific purpose. Then comes the detail the West could not tolerate. The hollows are separated from one another. The dead are divided into distinct compartments, sorted by what they were in life, and a hard boundary runs between the sections. One chamber holds the righteous, and Enoch notes something almost tender inside it, a bright spring of water, a small mercy for those who wait there. The other chambers hold the rest, in darkness, in different grades of it. One is set aside for the sinners who died without ever facing justice on the earth, another for a class already marked, who will not even be raised on the day of judgment but stay bound exactly where they are, forever. The dividing walls between these groups are not poetry. The text is explicit that the spirits cannot move between them. The dead do not wander. They are assigned. And Enoch is shown one spirit in particular, still crying out across the centuries after his body was long gone into dust. The spirit of Abel, still making his complaint heard, still accusing the line of Cain. The dead in this account are not asleep. They are awake, they are aware, and they are held. Stop on that image for a moment, because it is the quiet horror the whole chapter turns on. This is not the gentle sleep the funerals promise. The dead here retain their memory, their grievance, their voice. Abel has been in that chamber since the first murder in human history, and he is still speaking, still waiting for a verdict that has not yet come. The chambers are not a resting place. They are a holding cell with the lights left on, and the ones inside them are conscious of every year that passes. That single chapter quietly rewrites everything the later church worked so hard to make abstract. Heaven and hell, in the Western telling, are final destinations of the soul. Here they are stages of a process, and the process has a location, a structure, and rules of movement. The dead go down first. All of them, without exception. And what happens after depends entirely on a sorting that someone has to carry out. Which brings the question this whole account is circling. If the dead are collected, sorted, and held behind boundaries they cannot cross, then someone is doing the collecting. Someone is doing the sorting. Someone stands over the line and enforces it. Enoch answers that too, and it is the answer the Western canon scrubbed the hardest of all. 2 chapters earlier, in the 20th chapter, Enoch stops the narrative and simply lists a set of angels, giving each one a specific office. This is not the language of worship. It is closer to an assignment sheet, a roster of duty stations. Uriel, he writes, is set over the world and over the lowest pit. Raphael is set over the spirits of men. Michael is set over the best part of humankind. Gabriel is set over paradise, and the serpents and the cherubim. And one of them, named in the Ge'ez as Sarakael, is set specifically over the spirits of the children of men who transgress, the spirits that sin. Read that plainly. There is a named officer whose entire function is jurisdiction over the spirits of the dead who did wrong in life, not their torture in some distant fire. Their handling, their custody. The dead who sinned have a warden, and the warden has a name. But the roster does not stop there, because Enoch names an angel called Remiel, and he gives Remiel one job, stated in a single line. Remiel is the one whom God set over those who rise. Sit with that. There is a named being whose specific office is authority over the rising of the dead, over who comes back up. Someone is set over the sorting. Someone is set over the sinners. And someone is set over the threshold itself, over the very act of rising, which means the same power that governs rising can also govern refusal. The dead do not move on their own in this system. They are moved, and the ones who move them are named one by one in a chapter the West decided the faithful should never read. To understand how far that goes, you have to leave the ordinary dead behind and go back before the flood to the event the entire Book of Enoch is built around. Because up to here, the dead go down and are held, and that is unsettling enough. But there is a second category, and it is worse. A group of angels called the Watchers came down from their proper place. They took human women as wives, and they taught humankind things it was never meant to hold. The making of weapons, the casting of spells, the reading of the stars, secrets that belonged above and not below, and the offspring of that union were the giants the Hebrew scriptures call the Nephilim. They were never meant to exist. The giants were a mixture of two natures that were never supposed to combine. Spirit and flesh fused into one body. So when the giants finally died, a problem arose that had no precedent in all of creation. Their bodies returned to the earth like any body does. But their spirits had nowhere to go. They could not descend into the chambers where human spirits are gathered, because they were only half human, and they could not ascend to the places where the angels dwell, because they were only half spirit. They were born of a crossing. The entire order of creation had built no chamber to hold. Enoch records the ruling on them directly, in the 15th and 16th chapters, spoken as the words of God himself. The spirits that came out of the bodies of the giants, he is told, will not be received above. They are cast down. They will remain on the earth, and they will be called evil spirits, and their dwelling will be the ground and the hidden places beneath it. They will rise up against the living, against men and against women, because they came out of them. They afflict, they oppress, they bring ruin, and they are given no rest, no chamber of their own, and no appointed day of judgment like the ordinary dead. They are simply sent back down and left loose in the lower world until the final consummation of all things. Now hold that against the framework we just built. The ordinary dead are collected, sorted into the hollow places, and held in order until judgment. But this class of the dead is denied the hollows entirely. There is a category of the departed that the system will not admit, that is turned around at the door and pushed back below permanently by decree. The dead are sent back down. And Enoch names both the origin of these spirits and the authority that condemns them to it. The sending is not chaos, and it is not an accident. It is a sentence handed down from above and enforced from above. It is worth noticing what this quietly does to the idea of a demon. In this account, the things that torment the living are not a separate species, created evil from the start. They are the dead, a specific class of the dead, refused entry, roaming the lower world because the door above was shut in their faces. And the book does not stop at sentencing the offspring. It sentences the fathers. Earlier, in the 10th chapter, Enoch describes the ruling handed down on the watchers themselves, and it is delivered the way a judge reads out a punishment in open court. The leader called Azazel is to be bound hand and foot and cast into the darkness, into a pit opened in the desert, and covered over until the day of the great judgment. The one called Semyaza and the host who followed him are to be bound beneath the earth for 70 generations, held there until their sentence is complete. Named angels are given the task of carrying it out. So, this is not a book that mentions the lower world in passing. It names the jailers of the human dead. It names the class of the dead who are refused and sent back down. And it names the fallen powers who are themselves bound below by decree, along with the officers assigned to bind them. Top to bottom, the whole descending order has names attached to it. Here is what should stop you cold. If this were only one strange book from one mountain church, it would be a curiosity and nothing more. But it is not only one book. The same architecture, the dead held below, sorted, administered by named keepers, with a special class of them denied passage, appears in the oldest civilizations that surrounded the world Enoch came out of. And they wrote it down with no known way of copying from one another. Go east first, into Mesopotamia, into Babylon. They called the underworld Irkalla, and they called it the land of no return, and they meant that phrase with total precision. It was a place you descended into, down through 7 gates, and at each gate a keeper stripped something away from you, a garment, a crown, a piece of who you had been, before it would let you pass deeper. It was ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal, and her minister Namtar carried out her orders. The dead did not drift there. They were processed, station by station. Presiding over the sentence were the Anunnaki, the 7 judges of the underworld, who fixed the fate of the dead the way a court hands down a verdict. And the Mesopotamians described a class of underworld enforcers, the Gala, whose entire function was to seize the living and the dead and drag them down below against their will. It is the same job Enoch hands to his named keepers, written in a different language, a world away. Now go west, into Egypt, which mapped the country of the dead more obsessively than any people before or since. The Egyptian underworld, the Duat, was not a mood or a metaphor. It was a geography painted across tomb walls, its gates drawn out and their guardians labeled by name. each one demanding that the traveler know its name before it would open. No soul forced its way through. You passed only by naming the keeper of each gate correctly, and any soul that could not name it did not pass at all. The dead were led into a great hall, and there the heart was placed on a scale and weighed against the feather of truth, while a recording god wrote down the result. The dead had to pass 42 divine judges, each one named, and deny a specific crime to each, one sin declared clean to one named judge, all the way down the line. And if the heart failed the scale, the Egyptians described an ending far worse than any lake of fire. You were given over to the second death, an annihilation from which nothing at all returned. That phrase did not stay buried in Egypt. It surfaces again in the Book of Revelation, the one apocalypse the Western Church did decide to keep, where the final fate of the condemned is called by that exact name, the second death. The West cut the book that mapped the chambers, but it could not cut the vocabulary. And notice the direction they all point. Enoch is led westward. The Egyptians placed the entrance to the Duat in the west as well, where the sun sinks below the horizon. Two peoples who could not read a word of each other's writing both put the country of the dead in the same quarter of the sky. Either every ancient culture strung along that corridor independently invented the exact same bureaucracy of death, down to the named wardens and the second worst fate, or they were all describing something they believed they had received from the same source. And this is precisely why the passages were dangerous. An abstract afterlife cannot be checked. Heaven is a feeling. Hell is a state of separation. But Enoch hands you chambers with measured walls, keepers with proper names, a boundary with rules, and a class of the dead handled by a specific procedure. That is not devotion, that is documentation. And a documented system is one that could be studied, argued with, even feared in a concrete way, which is exactly what an institution that claims sole authority over death cannot allow ordinary people to hold in their hands. So return to the claim we started with and weigh it now against what the text actually says. The Ethiopian Bible does say the dead are taken downward and held. It does say a certain class of them is refused and sent back below, denied the rising the others are promised. And it does name the beings who receive the dead, who sort them, who guard the boundary, and who hold authority over the very act of rising. The West called all of that too specific to be safe and set it aside. The people who lived closest to the source copied it 11 times and buried it in the desert. The letter of Jude quoted it as prophecy. The Ethiopians simply never stopped reading it. The chambers are still described, the boundary is still drawn, and the names of the ones doing the sending are still written down in full